topic tonight is your 1 week action plan for S3 security. So looking at what you can do over a 5-day period to try and find out what your risks are and remediate those risks. Now, what we need to understand is what are the risks that go with buckets when they're not configured very well. So the first risk is you have to understand who can, first of all, view or change my bucket policies. So who can actually see the policy I've applied to that bucket as far as what access I'm granting. Because if they know what the bucket policy or the IAM policy or the ACL looks like, they might be able to go in and change it and grant themselves access. Evident has a tool called Evident, and this is not a plug, but this is just as an example. When we scan our customer buckets, there's some of the numbers we see as far as when we check, okay, is there a global, as an ACL being listed globally accessible? And that fails 4.3% of the time. And we've got statistics for some of the other checks that we do as well. So, you know, it's not too bad, I guess, but if those buckets are holding very critical information, you only need one bucket to be left open to cause you a lot of problem. So the second thing you need to check for then is who can actually access the objects within the buckets. So here we get a lot more failures. So we find, you know, global get and global delete check failing, you know, 6 to 7% of the time. So that could be a large number of buckets where that check is failing. So typically, for whatever reason, customers are leaving these things open, and the majority of our customers, when we go in and do that initial scan of their environment, we find a lot of misconfigurations. It's also important to understand the terminology that is on users, because that can also create confusion. They have this concept of all users and all authenticated users, and you'd think that means all the users that you've defined within your IAM service, but it's not. All users means anyone that can guess or knows the bucket name can get access to it if all users has global permissions. And authenticated users just means any user that has authenticated to an AWS account. That's not your account, that could be any account. So it's very easy to set yourself up with an account and become an authenticated user and then try and get access to other people's buckets. And like I said, hackers have written a lot of tools and scripts, and we've actually got DevOps cycles now for producing code to go and search for S3 bucket misconfigurations. And then there's other aspects to buckets that can help us, or that we could use to configure our buckets in such a way that we're not being left vulnerable. So the first one is looking at how do I stop people deleting information out of the bucket. And one of the good features here that you could look at is the MFA delete capability. So when you turn on MFA delete on a bucket, it means that not only does that person have to have access to delete objects, they also have to go through a multi-authentication procedure as well on top before they can delete anything. And maybe that's not related to security, that might be to try and circumvent people's mistakes, because people do make mistakes. If they have to take that extra step before they actually delete something, it protects the data and it prevents accidental deletion sometimes. On top of that, some of the other services or the other configuration that we could look at is object versioning. So this is looking at, as we change objects in the bucket or update them or add new versions, the previous version is kept. And so that means if we do accidentally lose something, we've got something to roll back to. Or if someone goes in maliciously and deletes our content, perhaps we've got a previous version that we can roll back to so we don't lose everything. That is only in use about 50% of the time, and that's probably to do with the fact that there is a cost involved. So if the more data that you're storing, every version of your object requires extra storage, and that can increase our costs. So it's a good idea to understand what's being stored in the bucket. Is it something that's recoverable? So if we lost the contents of the bucket, could we easily recreate it? If so, we might want to turn versioning on. An example might be thumbnails for a website, for example. Similar to that is the ability to do audit logging of activity in the buckets. So this is another checkbox that you can turn on for your buckets to be able to go back and look at, after a breach has occurred, who caused it, what happened, when did it happen, and give you some forensic information on trying to track down the cause of the breach and maybe trying to recover from it as well. And again, there's a cost involved with that because you have to store the logs somewhere. So this is something that you'd probably turn on for your critical buckets that are storing production data or PII sort of data, so that you've got some mechanism for doing that. We find about, I wouldn't say it fails, but only about half the buckets that we scan have got this facility enabled. Okay, so that's the key risks. The main one, obviously, the moral of the story is if you've got buckets that are globally accessible, they're at risk, they're vulnerable, and you probably want to restrict access to the buckets where you can. Now, there are circumstances where you do want to make them publicly accessible. For example, if you're hosting a static website, people need to be able to access the objects because that's part of your website, then yeah, there's a business reason for having that global accessibility. However, in the majority of the cases, it's more that you're storing business data and you probably don't want to have that global access. So the action plan then, the day one would be look at auditing your AWS accounts. So finding out what AWS accounts you have, and that sometimes is more difficult than it sounds. Reason is that you've got your obvious teams that have got AWS accounts, so IT and the cloud team, and maybe some of the business teams have got well-known AWS accounts that they're using. But then you've got those siloed parts of the business that maybe have created an account, put it on their credit card, marketing or sales or someone, for purposes of just ease of use or doing something because it's the easiest path and they needed access and they didn't want to have to go through IT. So there's those type of accounts. And then you've got the kind of hidden accounts, I guess, where people are trying to fly under the radar. They're creating accounts, maybe the developers trying to create their own testing. They want to use their own environments rather than using the official test environments. But vulnerabilities can still exist if they're putting data into those environments. That's part of the corporate information, then it needs to be protected. And we have customers that are actually leveraging procurement to try and find out what AWS accounts are in place. So they're going to the guys paying the bills, the credit card bills, and seeing if any of that is being paid back to Amazon. That's a way to identify other accounts that we may not be aware of. So day two then, identify key risks. So now that we understand what accounts are in play, what are the key risks across those accounts? And there's various ways that you can identify what the risks are. Like I was saying earlier, you can do it manually, you can do manual checks, you can use the tools that AWS provide, but it could take a long time and it's a very manual inspection, therefore it's going to suck up a lot of resources, and it's something that you're going to have to keep doing because the nature of the cloud is that things are changing all the time. So as a plug, Evident have a product called the Evident Security Platform, and what our tool does is it scans all of your accounts, all of your regions, and all of your resources, and provides you a risk profile or a risk posture of how you've configured those resources in a single pane of glass. So you've got information about where your risks are, and you can identify where the problem issues are. As part of that, we have a report called the S3 Bucket Fitness Report, and that's purely focused on the type of S3 vulnerabilities that I spoke about in the previous slides. So it's looking for globally accessible, globally readable, globally writable buckets, buckets where global delete is enabled, and also looking at where versioning is not enabled, where audit logging is not enabled. So you can quickly identify where your problems are. Similarly, and I'm not an expert on this part of the solution, but Palo Alto Networks have a product called Aperture, which can actually reach inside the bucket and see what type of information is stored within there. So it can say, okay, this bucket looks like it's just random junk, maybe it's test data, whereas this bucket over here, this has got a whole bunch of your customers' personal information, or it's got credit card information, tax file numbers, or stuff like that. So it can help you classify the information that's stored within your buckets and your containers, and it can then give you an evaluated risk profile rather than just a broad across the board sort of view of these buckets are open. It can tell you where your really high risk buckets are residing. It can at the same time also quarantine malware, so if it finds malware inside the buckets, it can pull it out and put it into a quarantined area. Okay, so now that we've kind of discovered the risks and presented the risks, the next step is to work out, to prioritise the remediation efforts. So finding out where we need to start and work through the really high risk stuff. And again, back to the evident product, we have as part of the security report, we can categorise the risks as either being a high, medium or low, and give you the high profile stuff at the top of the list, and the number of failures for that particular risk type. So it allows you to then kind of drill down and focus your efforts on those really high vulnerabilities. And then you can start at the important stuff, I guess. Day 4, keep going. So not just remediating the high risk stuff, but eventually getting through to the point where you've resolved most of the issues, and being able to track your progress. So making sure that as over time, over the 5 or 30 or 60 days, you can see how your security posture is improving, and you can go back to an individual point in time and see on a particular day or how a week ago what the risks were as compared to what the risks are now. So we can provide evidence of the fact that we are actually improving our security posture. And then day 5 is repeat. So this is not a one-time effort. Clearly, new resources are going to be created constantly. Buckets are going to be torn down, new ones are going to be created, information is going to be moved between buckets. So it's something that has to be done continually. And for this reason, it's a good idea to leverage the Amazon API. So Amazon does a really good job of providing this configuration information via all the APIs that they release. So it's quite, if you have a tool that can access that information via the API, it gives you that ability to consistently and constantly be aware of what your risks are and make sure that you're continuing to have a very secure environment. What it can also do is then map those security checks against things like compliance frameworks. So not just a security visibility, but a continual compliance visibility. For example, if you're trying to be PCI DSS compliant, and they have a number of controls that they require in order to maintain compliance, we can check against those controls whether there's any misconfigurations or vulnerabilities and provide you a compliance report at the end of it. And it might be that you want to then feed those alerts off to other third-party tools. So the guy earlier was talking about Sumo Logic. If you want to use this as a way to gather the information into a SIEM tool like Sumo, there's pre-built integrations as well that would allow you to do that. And back to the S3 bucket fitness report. This is going to continuously keep updating itself and keep giving you visibility across S3. Obviously, S3 is just one part of the problem, but if your board of directors or your execs come to you and say, how are we going? I'm worried about all these S3 breaches. I want to make sure that we as a company are not going to be exposed and we're not going to be the next headline. This is a report that we built in response to those requests for our existing customers. So if you're interested, what I recommend you do is sign up for a free trial. We have a fully featured 14-day trial. You can onboard as many AWS accounts as you like, and it will give you, it takes less than 5 minutes actually to onboard an account. All it requires is you create a role within IAM. It's a cross-account role that gives our solution is actually hosted in AWS as well. It gives us read-only API access to go and pull down the configuration metadata and then provide you a risk posture. You'll have that within the first 15 minutes of onboarding your account. That's a good way to show the value of these automated tools for providing security and visibility. So thanks everyone. I hope that was informative, useful. It is a hot topic, so yeah, good luck. Questions? Yes.
Would it be just simple just to say your company policy that everything in the S3 is encrypted? Then it doesn't matter whether you've got ACL control, public visibility, or physical users. It becomes a very simple thing, and then you just have to look for the buckets that are not encrypted, and that's the simple. And those are the ones that are your danger points or possible failure.
Yeah, I guess for a lot of customers, it's not turned on by default. They still want to be aware. I get encryption also comes down to managing certificates and so on. And you know, the guys that are spinning up these shadow IT accounts, you know, they're not that concerned with encryption. We're finding it's very hard to enforce rules in the cloud world. Developers want to do it their way. They want to pick the services they want to use, and they don't really interact much with the infrastructure or security teams. So at least having a tool to see where the problem's being created can help. But yeah, I agree. If everything was encrypted, we wouldn't have a problem.
It's like the layers of the onion with security. You know, you have to have multiple layers of security there. So that's fine. Yeah. Any more questions?
Yeah.
Yep.
Sorry, I just have another question. Well, there are two questions that I found. One is more technical. Okay, what would be the implication if we encrypt everything of the objects?
So what's the implication if you encrypt everything in the objects in S3?
Yeah, in S3. Yeah. So would that reduce the effect? Like if it's really stolen or identity is stolen, someone like they download all the objects.
Yeah.
So they basically won't encrypt it.
Well, if they can't decrypt the content, then they can't read it.
Yeah.
Is
that something you would recommend?
Yeah, so we definitely recommend, and internally we encrypt everything, but there's different levels of maturity out in the customer world as far as best practices. So if the tool will go through and find the ones that aren't encrypted and tell you should go and encrypt this bucket. But there's nothing to stop someone creating a new bucket later on that's not encrypted. But to your question, if it's encrypted, then you should be fairly safe.
Yeah. So the second question I'm asking is actually, that's my feel. It's a tool, what you present is very good, but on the other hand, is about one thing you might also talk to the clients is about best practice of storing object in S3. Because S3 is basically it's a storage of objects. Anything you can put that is in S3, right?
Yeah.
So by default, lots of objects should be private, not exposed through URL. If you really want to access the data, you use some REST API or some service to access that. There you get more control.
I don't think there's any way to restrict access to an S3 bucket if you know the bucket namespace. Because it's not sitting inside the VPC.
You put that private, so you wouldn't be able to see it.
Well, one of the things we do have built in, other than that S3 report, is the CIS AWS Foundation benchmark report. So we do check against all their recommendations and all the S3 recommendations, and we alert. It's obviously not looking at the content within the bucket, but it is not just S3, but EC2 and the other aspects as well, and IAM. Yeah.
Just because it's so much flexibility.
Great power comes great responsibility, right? So this is the thing. AWS is huge, it's broad. That's why there's partners around to help you set up the accounts correctly. And probably there's so many pitfalls, for want of a better word, but you need that flexibility. And then you need to actually tighten it up or loosen it down depending on what's going on. But encrypt everything is a good start. principle of least privilege, stop access to everything you can. But it's hard to manage when the team grows and new people come in and add new apps and they're talking to this bucket, somebody opens it for a test. You have a tool as a backup strategy to kind of scan that and ensure that it is still encrypted on a regular basis. So, cool. Any more questions?
I've heard that Wildfire is one of the biggest sandboxing technology from Palo Alto. So how do you actually integrate Wildfire along with Aperture for sandboxing?
I think I'm too new to the company. I don't even know what Wildfire does.
Okay.
Palo Alto are going to do a presentation at an upcoming meetup, I know.
Yeah, so you can ask them. Juniper guy, ask a Palo guy question.
Okay, yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, I'm still just focused on this.
He's still wearing the Evident t-shirt.
Yeah.
The deal is just inked not too long ago.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Good question though. Save it for the next one.
Yeah. I'll warn the guys back at the office.
Any more questions?
Sorry, other than S3, what other compliance check can you do?
Well, we look at EC2, security groups. Ports have been left open globally. A common one is port 22 for ease of access. People leave it open to 0.0.0.0. There's a whole bunch of ports we check for. There's IAM policies, password strength, whether keys get rotated regularly, whether you're using CloudFront as a kind of, or AWS config. These are additional services that AWS provide to help you with your security. There's about 200 different checks across all of the services that AWS provide. We also have just started supporting Azure as well. I'm not sure it's the right forum, but so it's a multi-cloud kind of security tool now, and Google is coming as well.
Cool. Thank you. Any more questions? Craig, thank you very much. That was awesome. Craig, so thank you for signing in for the door prize. The winner, drum roll, music. Oh, we don't have a sound system. Sorry. Do beatbox. Is Wahid Shalali still here? Wahid? Yes. Thank you very much. Well done. Thank you. There's an echo dot. Gary here is going to get it. So just to finish up tonight, thank you very much. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Sumo Logic and Evident, now stroke Palo. But we run a webinar series which is fortnightly. We run the meetups which are monthly, and then we have our hands-on labs which are sort of quarterly. So just to kind of like keep you guys engaged and updated. But hang around, have a chat, have another beer. I think there's more beers left in the fridge. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you all. See you this time next month, which is with Commvault and Talent. So, thank you everyone. Cheers. Bye bye.